Hello and welcome to today's Wyoming Community Navigator Program webinar, Building a High Reliability Business, Strategies for Thriving in an Uncertain World. We're so glad you joined us for today's presentation. My name is Audie Cunningham. I'm the West Central Wyoming Regional Director with the Wyoming Small Business Development Center. I'll be your facilitator today along with our marketing specialist, Maureen, working behind the scenes through the chat or question function to assist you the best that we can with any technical difficulties or questions you might have. The Wyoming Community Navigator pilot program is funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration and utilizes the Wyoming Entrepreneurial Support Network to reduce barriers all small businesses often face, including those owned by groups such as veterans, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color. The Wyoming Community Navigator program uses a hub and spoke model to pursue its goals. Through their collective efforts, the hub and spokes provide training, mentorship, access to capital, and access to other resources to help business owners build resiliency and ultimately be the driving force behind Wyoming's economic recovery. The Wyoming SBDC, or Small Business Development Center Network, is a University of Wyoming program available to all residents in the state and funded by the Wyoming Business Council and the U.S. Small Business Administration. We provide no-cost confidential advising and technical assistance to all Wyoming entrepreneurs and small business owners. The Wyoming SBDC network advisors are located throughout the entire state. They not only help new businesses get started, but also help current owners with growth, reinvention, exiting, and recovering from challenges in their business. Now I'm going to hand it over to Bridget and Daniel, our presenters for today.
All right, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Audie. We are always happy to be here with the Wyoming SBDC, and we're especially excited to talk about building a high reliability business, using some strategies to prepare yourself to not only survive, but thrive in an uncertain and changing world. So as just mentioned, we are Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson. We are Vice Presidents of Ascendant Design and Training. I'm the head of the services department for our company, and I'm a learning experience designer. So my main job is to work with our clients, who are mostly companies, to help them develop custom training solutions to help their employees do their jobs better. Daniel is our head of product development, and he develops technological training tools to help people like me develop better training products and outcomes. So today together, you can scan our QR code on the screen if you want to connect with us, and I can bring this up at the end of the webinar too, if you wanted to follow us on LinkedIn or get our contact information. But we're always happy to work with people to help them strategize how to create better training outcomes for their businesses. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what we'll do today. In this interactive webinar today, we'll explore a framework that you can use to navigate uncertainty both within your business and in the wider world. So we'll start today by describing what high reliability organizing is and how it relates to small business management. From there, we'll look at the 5 principles of high reliability organizing, and then we'll take a dive into the mindsets and practices you can use to apply each one in your business. So throughout this webinar today, we encourage you to share your thoughts, to ask questions in the chat, to respond to each other's questions. Feel free to really engage with this. I will pause at certain points to see if there are questions, and we'll have time at the end to answer questions as well. So before we continue, I just wanted to give you just a really brief overview of my own experience with high reliability organizing. I helped develop a training for hospital programs in 2017 that used this framework as a way to reduce incidences of patient harm. So this is this is things like wrong site surgery, accidentally leaving medical tools inside of patients, just harmful things that happen in a high stress, fast moving environment. And so when I started to actually dive into some of these principles, I saw the relevance for how other industries and especially small businesses like myself could apply these principles to make themselves more resilient in the face of change. So let's just take a moment to discuss why high reliability organizing might be relevant right now. I think the best way to describe this is the acronym VUCA, or VUCA, I think is how it's pronounced. And this is a term coined by the US Army War College to describe the global situation after the Cold War. It's probably even more relevant now, today, than it was then. Here's what it stands for. The V stands for volatility. This is, of course, frequent, rapid, significant change. U is uncertainty, or just a lack of predictability. Complexity, usually caused by a lot of interconnections that lead to unexpected complications. And ambiguity, systems that are difficult to understand or opaque. There's not a lot of transparency. So as you're probably already aware, we live in a very we live in an increasingly interconnected and fast-paced world. And this means that a change anywhere in the world could have unexpected and large-reaching consequences, including on you and your business. So I want to just kind of take a pulse check today. I'd like you to tell me where you might be experiencing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and/or ambiguity in your business today. And this is not just within your business, but the larger world that might be impacting your business as well. So we have a QR code on the screen. You can scan that with your phone to enter this poll, or you can go to slido.com, and at the top of the page, there'll be like a little text box where you can put in the code that you see on the screen. Use either of those methods to log in and just give me a quick description where you might be seeing these 4 elements in your business today. I'll give you some time to think about that. Okay, changing ingredient prices. Yeah, that's a good one. Supply chain vendor shortages. Yeah, that was a huge one. That was a huge one that we saw coming out of COVID. Was I think everybody realized just how complex and fragile the supply chain is, and that impacted a lot of people, probably everybody on some level. So you can see we have one more typing. Sometimes it takes just a second for it to upload here, but thank you for participating today. This is really helpful to just kind of get some ideas about how you're seeing these as well. Reduction of customer traffic and expendable income. That's a great example. Yeah, and if I'm understanding it correctly, that's customers having less expendable income, and as a result, you're seeing less traffic. Yeah, and again, that's a good example because things are complex, right? So you have inflation, you have all these other things that are impacting people's ability to spend money, and that's going to affect you personally as a business owner. Excellent. I see we have one more coming in. One area that I personally see this a lot is just the fast pace of technology and how companies are trying to keep up with that. So, I mean, for us, it's not necessarily a bad thing because they need training, but it's also this thing of like, how do we keep up with technologies and how do we balance between training so that we're not investing a ton into technologies that might be obsolete in 5 years. Okay, cost increases after quote. Okay, yeah, that's a big one. Transportation and illness. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, these are all good examples of how these 4 elements or how VUCA is impacting you personally. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Okay, so go ahead. We'll talk a little bit about how these 5 principles of high reliability organizing can help you in your business. But first, let's do some level set and just kind of describe what it is. High reliability organizing, or HRO, is a collection of processes and mindsets used in organizations where the risks of mistakes are very high and where a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. So think of things like commercial airlines, aircraft carriers, nuclear power plants, hospitals, things like that. The study of high reliability organizing arose from a desire to understand how some of these high risk critical systems could go for long periods of time with no major accidents. And what the researchers found is that these organizations apply a specific way of looking at the world and looking at risk. So you can apply these same principles in your business as well. Just one more quick note on kind of what HRO is. The main goal of it is to make breakdowns or potential breakdowns more knowable by being attuned to what's called weak signs of failure. These are just small, subtle signs that are easy to miss, but are indicating that there might be some problem evolving in the system. So the way that high reliability organizations manage their risk and manage their mindsets effectively is they focus on 5 key principles. They think about failure, simplifications, operations, resilience, and expertise. And they think about these things in oftentimes very different ways than we are conditioned to think about them normally. So we'll go through each one of these today, and we'll talk about what it is and how you can apply it. We'll start with failure. The first one is called preoccupation with failure. And that one's interesting because that one always evokes a large range of emotions. So I just want to get a pulse check again. What word do you think of when you hear the phrase preoccupation with failure? Go ahead and use your QR code or use the website slido.com to enter your responses. Anxiety, sure. Yep, that's a big one. Worry, fear. Yeah. Thinking about failure intentionally is not fun, and that's completely normal. See, there's one more coming in. Okay, anxiety. Okay. Yeah, and that's a common one. We don't want to think about what goes wrong, right? We want to focus on what can go right. Focusing on the negative can feel really, really stressful. So I get that. So thank you for responding. I appreciate it. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Oops, I went backwards. Sorry about that. Okay. So what this actually means is preoccupation with failure is staying sensitized to the subtle changes that indicates a problem might be developing in the system. So it's less about kind of worrying or obsessing and more about being proactive in identifying little signs that something is going wrong so that way you can have the opportunity to fix it. And again, it's really focused on what those weak signals look like. And that's important because weak signals of failure, if you can catch it then when it's still weak, those are the times when the failure is easiest to avoid or mitigate. It's when those signals get really obvious, especially in complex, ambiguous systems, that they become much, much harder to rectify and deal with. Because at that point, the problem has probably spread throughout the system. It's probably interacted in unexpected ways with other complexities, and it gets really hard to deal with. So the idea is to just be sensitized to small little signs that something might be off. So as we saw with our poll, this particular principle often comes with negative connotations. But when applied healthily, and of course with a balanced perspective, it can actually be a very positive thing. For one thing, it can help you overcome confirmation and desirability biases. These things that prompt us to see only what we want to see or what we expect to see. And it can also help you push back against what's known as positive asymmetry. And this is when you're only thinking about desired or positive outcomes. And there's nothing wrong with being positive, but if you're only fixated on what can go right, then you're not imagining what can go wrong. And if you can't imagine what can go wrong, you can't at all be prepared to deal with it when it happens. Okay, so let's think about an example. So let's say you're in small scale manufacturing. One thing you might do to practice this is to include quality control in your daily huddle meetings to identify potential defects early in products and prevent them from affecting the quality of the finished product. Something fairly simple, but again, it's being sensitized to those small defects, those small signs of problems that could become bigger later on, especially if a product moves down the production line. So let's talk about some mindsets you can use to apply this. The first one is really to try to actively surface deviations, to notice when something is different. We have a temptation oftentimes to normalize deviations, to say, it's just a little bit off or it's no big deal. But high reliability organizations really actually elevate these, and then they get curious about what's happening, right? What is causing this deviation and what are its potential implications? The next thing you can do is really try to lean into practicing self-awareness. Recognize when you're being preoccupied with the familiar, the known, and the desired. And finally, this is an interesting one. It's helpful to start thinking about near misses as danger disguised as safety. So here's an example of that. Say, say you're in a nuclear power plant and something has gone wrong and a safety measure kicks in and it prevents a meltdown. So our tendency is to say, like, see, the system is working, everything's fine. A high reliability organization, though, would say, like, wait, how did the problem get that far into the system? That should never have gotten that far. And if this problem can get through, what other evolving failures are in the system that we don't know about yet? So, and again, I mean, you don't have to lean too hard into this. You don't have to, have this be your only lens on how you view the world and how you view your business. But practicing these in balance can really help you kind of develop a more proactive way at looking at things that could go wrong. So let's look at some concrete practices you can use for this. The first one is to be very specific about what mistakes you don't want to make. Define what failure looks like in a situation, and then define the ways it could happen. That way you can kind of reverse engineer a bad situation, and then you kind of know what you can do to avoid it. Make a point of examining past failures, large and small. When something goes wrong, just take some time to kind of diagnose it and figure out what happened. You can also look for non-examples, as they're called, or examples of what not to do, both within your industry and in small business circles as a whole. One resource that I find really helpful for this is a subreddit on the Reddit website. The subreddit is called Small Business. And once in a while, you'll find example of somebody who has unfortunately gotten themselves into a lot of trouble with their business. And I mean, of course, you always want to send, empathy, for people in that situation. But you can also kind of, see what happened and kind of understand what went wrong and then learn from that so you don't make that same mistake. One of the biggest things you can do, and we'll talk about this quite a lot, is to create psychological safety within your business and within your team. When people feel like they will be punished for uncovering mistakes, they're going to be a lot less likely to speak up when they notice those weak signs of failure, and you don't want that in your system. So instead, here are some things you can do. When a mistake happens, treat it as a learning opportunity. What can you learn from this? There's a phrase that says, a stumble can prevent a fall. If it's not a huge mistake, you can say, okay, we had a stumble. What can we learn from this so we don't fall next time? You can obviously, and you should, hold people accountable, but also give them support and maybe look into what contributed to the mistake apart from a person's decision. It could be, say like environmental factors, a policy, company culture. Just get really curious about what caused that and see if you can give support to your employees to make sure that doesn't happen again. And finally, try to reward curiosity and honesty about mistakes and try to de-escalate perfectionism. Because perfectionism puts people in a spot where they feel, again, like they can't report mistakes. They can't admit that they've been wrong. And that's not what you want if you want to be able to practice high reliability organizing. So the last practice for this is to intentionally seek out bad news. And this is not easy, right? Because we have those confirmation and desirability biases that run as just like subroutines in our brain. We want to, read what, makes us feel good, but make an effort once in a while to reach out and read some bad news, things that could say, hey, this could be a problem. And also reward people around you and in your organization who are willing to tell you hard things that you need to hear. So that's preoccupation with failure. I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions so far.
I don't see any questions right now, Bridget.
Okay, excellent. So we'll go on to the next one. This is reluctance to simplify. And when we say simplify, we're talking about simplifications, things that make things easy to understand. So this could be like labels, comparisons, analogies. All these things are helpful when you're making sense of a problem or of a situation, a complex evolving situation. But putting a label on something too quickly can distract your attention from specific signs of an evolving failure, right? It kind of blinds you to what's new and what's different. So here's an example of how you might apply this in a business. So let's say you're the owner of a boutique clothing shop and you're evaluating the risks of marketing on a new social media platform. So instead of just looking only at how this platform is similar to ones you've used in the past, make an effort to explore how it's different and kind of hold your assumptions loosely until you actually know how it behaves. So this will help you develop better strategies for engaging with your audience on that platform because you're noticing how it's different and not just how it's similar. So here are some mindsets you can use. The first one is to really resist the urge to simplify by becoming more comfortable with uncertainty. Practice withholding judgment until you have enough information to make an informed interpretation, and accept that your interpretation will probably change and evolve over time. Practice holding on to your ideas loosely. Hold them at arm's length. Be willing to change your mind when better evidence presents itself. Kind of along with this is to resist the temptation to rely too heavily on analogies and comparisons. And this is one that I struggle with because I always like finding analogies and saying, oh, this is just like this, or this is just like this. It can help me understand things, but I also know that it also blinds me to ways that it's different. And if I can't see that, then I can't fully understand what's happening. Along with that, get in the habit of looking for novelty. Practice seeing what's new. When something happens, ask yourself, what's different about this situation? What's happened that I've never seen before here? Okay, so now we'll look at some practices, some concrete things you can do with this. The first is to make sure that you're welcoming diverse perspectives within your organization and also from the people in your network who support you. Encourage people to surface details that contradict a popular consensus or idea, and make sure that you're not inadvertently shutting down your skeptics. Within yourself and your team, try cultivating a healthy level of skepticism. Ask yourself on a regular basis, what do I know? And how do I know that? Be willing to question assumptions, your own and everybody else's, obviously respectfully, and encourage others to do the same. Treat your simplifications, your labels, your categories, your analogies, treat them as hypotheses to be tested, not as hard and fast definitions that you have to defend at all costs. Model how to think, or try thinking out loud with your team. If you have employees, show them how you think about categories. Show them how you can question simplifications, how you can refine definitions over time, discover limitations, and see new details. Because the more you do that, the more you're not only going to model how to think for these things, but you're also going to give your team permission to do the same thing as well. And finally, probably the biggest one for this is to make sure that you prioritize interpersonal skills within your business. This is because surfacing complexity and challenging assumptions will, by definition, increase friction in your team. And there's a higher level for disagreement, some of which could not be productive. So make sure that you have a culture based on mutual respect and trust before you try leaning too heavily into this one. Okay. Do we have any questions, Maureen?
Looks clear right now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Cool. So before we move on, I just wanted to highlight this quote from Tad Allen, former US Coast Guard Admiral. He says, "Don't dumb down the complexity." And I think you could, I think if you can condense this one principle into a one-sentence statement, this would probably be it. Okay, now let's talk about sensitivity to operations. What this means is that you're aware of what the system is actually doing and not what you hope or think it's doing. Now with all the other HRO principles we're talking about today, this can include operations within your business, especially if you run a very complex business. But more often than not, it might be systems outside of your business, things that we talked about before, things like supply chains and the economy and things like this. You can't control those things, but if you remain sensitized to what they're doing and if you're observing what they're how they're behaving in real time, you have a better chance of adapting to them successfully. Okay. Part of this also is recognizing two things. First is that your behavior in the system will have impacts on the system that might be very different from what you intend. So, focusing on actual outcomes rather than just solely intentions. And also being aware of the fact that the system is evolving in ways that you may not realize yet. You might think it's doing one thing, but it's doing something entirely different. So that's kind of where you have to just, again, hold your simplifications loosely because it might be something totally different, from what you expect. So let's give an example of this. Let's say you're in food and hospitality, and well, let's say you're a restaurant owner. A good way to practice this is to have weekly meetings with your servers to gather feedback and suggestions. They're the ones on the front lines. They're the ones interacting directly with customers. They're probably going to have a really good idea in terms of not only what sort of dishes or menu items are popular, but they might, have conversations with their customers that indicate might be what's going on in the wider world. Those are always good things to know. If you're practicing this too in this context, you might also want to make sure that you have set hours in the day that you're available to your wait staff so they can come to you with questions or concerns. So a big part of this is having direct contact with your front line. So here are some mindsets you can use to practice this. The first one is to favor small iterative adjustments over large one-time overhauls. Dan and I refer to these as small reversible bets. Instead of betting the whole farm, make one small reversible bet and see what happens. See how your business reacts, see how the wider world reacts, and then iterate from there. This will give you a chance to see how the system, whether it's your business or the world at large, is responding to your change and allows you to learn what it's doing in real time. A big one for this too is to resist the temptation to succumb to perfectionism or analysis paralysis. This is one I struggle with personally because I want to have everything to be perfect. But if you're practicing sensitivity to operations, you're realizing that you can't really know what the system's doing until you make an action. So it's really about learning while doing and learning by doing. But you can't just simply, read a book or theorize. You actually have to interact, with your business and with the different elements that interact with it before you can know what it's doing. Okay, let's look at some practices here. A really good one to start implementing is using probing, actionable questions that guide your understanding. These can be things like, what are we doing? What are we missing? What are we not seeing? Where are we headed? And what are my expectations for the situation? I find that one to be really helpful because it helps me surface kind of the underlying, almost subconscious mindsets that I'm using to approach a problem. And when I can surface my expectations, I have a better idea of understanding if they're realistic, understanding if I'm only expecting good outcomes, and then comparing it against what I'm actually seeing in the world, and then adjusting those expectations as needed. Another one for this is called situated humility. And it's kind of a delicate balance between confidence and humility. It basically means that you're confident in your skills, but you're humble about your ability to understand a specific situation, just because, again, there's lots of complexity, lots of things, that you don't know about, lots of ambiguity. As we mentioned before, another way to practice this is to make sure you're prioritizing the front line. Because again, this is where you're really going to get a good idea of what the system is actually doing. So make sure that you invite feedback from frontline workers. Listen to the feedback and ideas that they give you, and make sure that you're visible to the front line too, because that'll give you more opportunities to cultivate trust and respect with the front line, and they'll be more likely to tell you when they see something that, that could indicate there's a big shift coming, or that maybe, hey, maybe we need to change our approach a little bit. And get in the practice of thinking about how your work affects people upstream and downstream from you in your internal system. And make sure that you're also encouraging your employees to do the same thing too. This practice will get people into the habit of thinking about how their choices impact the larger system, in this case, your business. And this is always a critical component to being sensitive to operations. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is a commitment to resilience, and I think this one is probably the most relevant one, especially in the post-COVID era. I think we saw lots of examples of resilient and non-resilient businesses during that time. So I think this one is probably the one that's most in everybody's, that's most fresh in everybody's memory. So what does this mean? Well, high reliability organizations realize that even if they're doing everything they should be, there's a good chance that either something will slip through the checks and balances or something will happen that no one's seen before. So it's this idea that when something unexpected does happen, the organization is able to absorb that shock. They're able to, sustain core functions, and that at some point they're able to return to a stable state. So it's kind of like an elastic band, right? You can stretch it and it can change shape, but it doesn't break. And when you let go, it kind of goes back to something like it was before. That's a really simple way to, to say that. That is a simplification, but I think it's an accurate one. Before we do mindsets, let me give you an example of this. Let's start with something really simple. So let's say that you make artisan soaps, right? And you're starting to notice that your soaps aren't quite selling as well as you would like them to. You can take a look at the supplies that you have and say, okay, what other products can I sell? What other second profit center can I create? So in case this one isn't doing great, I've got something else to fall back on. Something really simple. I'd like you to drop in the chat, if you would. Can you think of other examples of what commitment to resilience might look like, either in your business or just a general example? So feel free to drop that in the chat. I'm sure we've probably seen several.
Yeah, we've got a couple here. It says preparing for seasonal change, preparing for cost differences, and supply chain problems.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Definitely, yeah. So those are all preparing for things that we're kind of aware of, that we're like, things that we're, things that could happen based on our past experience, which is great. Commitment to resilience goes a little bit beyond that and preparing for things that we can't even imagine yet. And that sounds really hard. It's actually a little bit more, but it's actually a little less of a heavy lift than you might think. And we'll get into that in just a second. So here's some mindsets for commitment to resilience. The first one is to make sure that you're not prioritizing efficiency over adaptation. And here's an example of what that looks like. When COVID hit, US hospitals were in short supply on masks. There were lots of reasons for that, but one part of that problem was because hospitals had really bought into a just-in-time stock model, where they only had the supplies they needed at the time, which was great for efficiency, great for cost savings. It wasn't great for a pandemic. So I think what we can learn from that is that over-focusing on efficiency means you're only prepared to respond to the disruptions you've already dealt with before. You won't have a whole lot of resources to deal with something you've never seen before. Another one is to be realistic and take stock of your current limits and capabilities. Regularly take stock of the strengths and gaps within your team, and then think of creative ways you might be able to leverage your strengths during a time of crisis. A big one for this is also the ability to cultivate mental agility. So basically just resist rigid mindsets. And this is something, again, I personally struggle with. I like having things to be very clear and certain and repeatable. But it's really important to be able to be flexible in your thinking, simply because when something unexpected happens, success during that time period may look very different from normal operations. And that's actually the way it should be. Resilience doesn't mean that you keep, going in lockstep the same way you always have. It means you're able to flex, you're able to change. So a good example of this would be restaurants during COVID. A lot of them switched to a delivery-only model. It was not easy, it was not ideal, and it was hard. But they were able to maintain a basic they were able to maintain their core purpose, which was, delivering great food. They were able to maintain their client base more or less during that time, even though success at that point looked very different from what it would look like if people were coming out to restaurants all the time. So that's a good example of what commitment to resilience can look like. Okay, let's look at some practices you can use for this. Probably the biggest one is to prioritize cross-training in your organization. The more your team members know about each other's roles, the more likely they will be able to work together during a crisis. A big part of commitment to resilience is being able to improvise. And if you give your team members knowledge about each other's roles, then you help them do that. If you're a sole proprietor or a solopreneur and you don't have anybody else in your shop, then you can also think about ways that you can broaden your own capability set by learning some new skills, like, maybe learning accounting. Even if you have an accountant to do that for you, great, but just know some of the basic principles. So that way, if you're really in a pinch or if something happens, you have that skill ready at hand. Obviously there's the practical application of that, but there's something kind of more philosophical involved here too. When you cross-train, you broaden your range of what are called response repertoires, or the range of things that you can notice and respond to. When you develop a new skill, you also develop the ability to see different things. And that's really important when you're practicing commitment to resilience, because you're able to understand what's happening, and you're better able to respond, even to things you haven't really seen before. Along with that, try to encourage yourself and your team members to embrace stretch assignments that require you to learn and do new things. Now, the caveat here is that if you're asking your employees to take on stretch assignments, make sure that you're giving them the time and resources to fulfill those successfully. That's really important. But when there's proper support involved, a stretch assignment can, again, broaden that broaden that response repertoire so people can respond more agilely in a crisis. Here's one. Try using your bad days as crisis practice. And this doesn't sound like fun, I know, but it's a really good way to start thinking differently about unpredictability and failure. Instead of it having be this thing that you want to avoid and you hate, when even small things go wrong, it's an opportunity to practice some of these skills, to say like, okay, what did we learn? What happened? What did I learn about the industry, my team, the world, my business, And then how can you carry those lessons forward to bigger crises later? Also think about the resources you need personally, mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever. Like, what do you need to make sure that you're investing in yourself now? So that way, when something unexpected happens, like a pandemic, you're more equipped to deal with it, not only as a business owner, but also as a person. One of the big things I think that we've seen over the past maybe year or so is companies, especially like tech companies, have really prioritized explosive growth. And when there was a change in the system, namely when interest rates went up. They had a really hard time adapting to that because they were only adapted to a certain environment where interest rates were near zero. So I think one of the best things you can probably take from that is to make sure that you're prioritizing sustainable growth over explosive growth fueled by extreme efficiency, right? Like move fast and break things may not be the best motto for running your business. And that's because growing too quickly or focusing only on efficiency during that time will actually fragilize your business and make you more fragile in the face of unexpected events. Okay. And the final one is to give yourself and your team opportunities to practice improvising. And as you do that, make sure that you're giving immediate feedback so that people can, again, start practicing how to learn by doing and learn while doing. Now, this isn't to say you throw out every plan and say, we're just going to wing it. But I mean, if there are instances where you can wing it and people might have to improvise a little bit, maybe try that. Help people develop some of those improvisation chops, and more importantly, help them learn how to work together better. Now, again, if you're a solopreneur, you can do this as well. Give yourself opportunities where you have to put yourself out there and learn something quickly. That'll help you develop your own personal skills to improvise. Okay, do we have any questions so far?
Yes. So our main issues come from changes in supply costs. How can I prepare for changes that are outside of my business realm?
That's a really good one. I would say try to get as much information you can, and that could mean going to sources that you normally wouldn't go to. So, I mean, if there's like a trade journal that might be helpful in terms of like understanding your supply chain, that might be helpful. Maybe joining also like some virtual groups. The nice thing about the internet now is there's lots of ways to meet people and interact with people who also run small businesses. See if you can get involved in some of those groups, especially if it includes people outside of your industry, because they might have a different insight on what's happening with supply chain than you do, and they might actually have some information on when supply chain changes might be coming down the road. So those two things, like, broaden your information diet and also try to build your network to include a broader range of people that you might be able to get good information from.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that question. That was really good. Okay, so the last one is deference to expertise. And this one's a little tricky, just because we have to kind of define what expertise is. In this case, expertise is highly situational. A person might be an expert in one situation and may not be an expert in another situation. But basically, when you're practicing this, it means you're seeking input from qualified sources throughout the organization or outside your organization, regardless of their rank or seniority. It's an effort to push back against the kind of ingrained bias that expertise always lives at the top of the org chart and it always increases with seniority. I mean, a lot of times that is true. But again, in a certain situation where you're experiencing something you've never seen before, somebody who is new and relatively inexperienced might have the background knowledge to be the expert in that situation when you're not. So important thing to note here is that deference to expertise does not necessarily mean you're also deferring decision-making power. It primarily is focused on sense making or trying to understand what's going on. So again, labeling, framing, interpreting, reinterpreting, those kinds of things. A manager may still and probably should still have decision-making ability in a situation where something unexpected happens. But they should make sure that they're listening to the people in their teams and in the organization who have relevant expertise before they make that decision. So here's an example. Let's say that you're a manufacturer of medical tech devices and you decide to form a cross-functional team that includes experts from different departments and with varying degrees of seniority and experience. And you task this team to collaborate to implement quality improvement processes. So again, you're pulling from expertise from around the organization and you're putting them together to have them help you make sure that you're more resilient in the face of change. So let's talk about some mindsets for this. The biggest one, like we already mentioned, is just recognizing that expertise is not always at the top of the org chart. If you're a leader, you really want to lean into cultivating humility and curiosity. One of the things that leaders can sometimes fall prey to is called the fallacy of centrality. It's this idea that because, hey, I'm the owner or I'm the CEO, I automatically know everything that's going on in my business because I'm right here in the middle of it. But in reality, people in those positions can oftentimes be unwillingly or unwittingly blind to things that are going on. So you want to counteract that by making sure that you stay humble, stay curious. Again, talk to your front line, talk to your new folks, all those kinds of things to make sure that you're actually getting all the information you need. And of course, there we go, fallacy of centrality. Okay, so let's talk about some practices for this. Make sure that you have a culture that encourages people to ask for help. So when something goes wrong or there's a small sign of failure or you're just like, I don't know how to make sense of this, that you're asking, or that people within your organization are asking for help. If you as a business owner, if you see something, you're like, I don't know how to make sense of this, again, like, I don't know what's going on with my supply chain, give yourself permission to ask for help from people. It's okay to ask for help. And in fact, that's a sign of courage and strength that you're able to do that. If you have a team, make sure you get to know all your team members. Ask them about their past work experience and, as appropriate, ask them about their interests outside of work. This will help you identify the informal expertise that could be helpful in a disruption. It's also a good idea, as just mentioned, to build your network to include a wide range of people from who have experts in different things, including people who are outside of your field or outside of your business sphere. The more connections you can have with, smart, responsive people, the more people you can reach out to for help, and the more better information you'll get about what's going on around you. Encourage people to tell you when you're wrong, and this one's hard, right? But this is a great way to practice that. Again, it helps us fight back against that fallacy of centrality. The final thing you can do, and this will actually help you practice all these different principles of high reliability organizing, is to try to run some business continuity scenarios, right? So imagine like a worst case scenario, fire, a flood, whatever, and have your team role play how you'll respond in that situation. Shift problems around to different people in the team until you find the person who is the most qualified to make sense of that situation. That's going to be your situational expert in that case. If you are a solo business owner and you don't have a team, you can just practice this on your own. Make a point of reading about what's going on in the world and imagine an unexpected event impacting your business. How would you respond? Take some time to kind of write that out and make a plan. That'll just, and then of course with that, who would you reach out to get help? And who can you reach out to now who can help you develop those skills before something like that happens? Okay, so here are some final thoughts to kind of wrap it all up. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, make sure that, or I would say this is the main takeaway, make sure that you prioritize psychological safety within your organization. This is because psychological safety underscores all the other high reliability organizing principles. And I know this from working from hospitals. This is something that they really hammer home, is that people have to be willing to say, hey, there's a problem, or hey, I made a mistake, or whatever, because that actually makes the organization healthier, and it makes sure that you can practice these principles. So make sure that you're building a company culture that fosters mutual trust and respect. Make sure that you're broadening your expectations intentionally to include outcomes you don't want or like, right? Just take some time occasionally to, kind of do a check-in. What are you expecting in your business? What are you expecting from this project, this product line, this client relationship? And, notice if you're only expecting good things, and if so, take note of some things that might go wrong and make sure that you're preparing for that as well. Because again, if you can't imagine or expect those things, you're really not in a position to react to them well. The final one is to just stay agile. Again, make those small reversible bets. Constant change is probably most likely going to be part of our lives for the foreseeable future. So if you can, the more you can practice rolling with the punches, and the more backup plans, 1 or 2 or 5 you can have in your back pocket, the better off you're going to be overall. So if you want to learn more, I would recommend Wyke and Sutcliffe's book, Managing the Unexpected. This is the book that I used to build this entire workshop. It has really amazing examples of each of the 5 principles, as well as specific kind of infrastructural things you want to have in place, like psychological safety, to make it all work. It's a very illustrative book. There's lots of interesting examples. It's not boring or dry at all. So I think you'll like it. Okay, so thanks for sticking with us today. I would just like to get a pulse check. Please tell me how meaningful this webinar was for you today. If you didn't find it very meaningful, feel free to tell me that. And if you'd feel comfortable, please put in the chat what things could have made it more meaningful for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. If you guys have questions, please stick them in the Q&A box on GoToWebinar. We can address them here on air. If you have something really specific to your industry, you can reach out to your regional advisor or connect with Bridget to answer your question specific to your industry or issues. There is one question in here, Bridget. Now, my employees don't come to me till I feel like it's too late. How can I increase our communication or change our culture quickly?
That's a really good question. Culture change is definitely a big issue. I will admit I am not an expert on culture change, but I can probably say probably the best thing you can do probably in the short term is just, maybe have some one-on-ones. Maybe have some one-on-ones with your employees just to check in with them personally, show that you are interested in their well-being, not just how they're performing at work, but how they feel in your organization. And then invite them to, follow up with you with any questions they have. That's not going to be an immediate fix. It's not going to make the problem go away right away. But that's one small thing you can do in the short term to show that you're invested in their well-being, and that's going to do a lot to help build a better culture.
Wonderful. That's great advice. Don't have a question, but a lovely comment. Thanks for the info, and I appreciate many of the points you made. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for your note, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I think that looks clear right now. Again, if you guys have specific questions, please reach out to Bridget or your Wyoming SBDC Network Regional Advisor. They can help you in your specific industry as you address issues along the way. Thanks again for attending. There will be a survey that pops up after this webinar concludes, so please fill that out. It helps us create better content to serve you and your small business. But thanks for attending, and thank you, Bridget and Daniel, for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see y'all next time.